Welcome back in, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King. I am joined today by Christian Clemente and Jason Caldwell. And you guys, it's starting to feel pretty real in terms of the season being right around the corner. As we record this here, what is today? July the 8th. Media Day starts a week from today. On Monday, heading out to Dallas. As was announced on Monday, Auburn will be represented by Peyton Thorne, obviously sixth-year senior quarterback, Eugene Asante, Auburn's leading tackler last year, kind of the heart of that defense. And then Keldrick Falk, the sophomore defensive end. As our buddy Justin Ferguson tweeted today, Keldrick is the first true sophomore to ever represent Auburn at SEC Media Day since it started in 1985. And so before we get rolling with today's main title content, we'll I guess touch on those guys a little bit. Jason, I think a lot of people kind of pegged Thorne and Asante as ones to watch for representation at media days. But look, we heard a lot in the spring about Keldrick Falk and the type of leadership he provides, and this is certainly a big indication of that with him being put up on the big stage next week.
I think that's exactly it. I think it's, we heard about Keldrick being the guy that stepped up and took on a leadership role and was developing some of those things even heading into year number 2. And that's obviously something that is carried over from the spring into the summer workouts, all those things. And that's how you earn that as a sophomore. And so, yeah, I think it's a great sign for Keldrick in terms of kind of his development, because there were a lot of other guys. When you start thinking about the number of other guys on this team that you could take and do that. Obviously, Keontae Scott's one of those guys that you could take and be a part of those things. But then you look at Rivaldo Fairweather. You've already seen Luke Deal, but you got Brandon Frazier, you got Dylan Wade. There are a lot of options on this team, and to see Keldrick Falk be that guy, I think that's a great sign for him heading into the 2024 season.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that super quick. I think it speaks to everything that Jason just said. I also don't think it's a terrible selling point for Hugh Freeze. Like you've been telling these guys, you've been telling the freshmen and the guys that you're recruiting, you're saying, hey, you have a chance to come in and make an impact right away. He showed it on the field, and you can even use this as a recruiting pitch a little bit if you want to. Say, look, he played as a freshman, and he's going to go out there and be a part of media days for us as a true sophomore. I don't think that'll be lost on Auburn.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is it's always a big extravaganza, and it's made for the publicity side of things. And this is an event that's pretty much just made for TV at this point. But it's not a bad thing in terms of branding. It's not a bad thing in terms of getting your players out there. And so I would not be surprised if Keldrick and Eugene Asante and Peyton Thorne are part of what will be a crazy week out there in Dallas, because obviously they're rolling out the red carpet for Texas and Oklahoma. So I am interested to see if it's going to come back to the normal Birmingham deep sort of southeast footprint next year, or maybe they'll start. Heck, if you're gonna cater to Oklahoma and Texas, why not start making the rounds and go elsewhere in the league, closer to some of these other schools? So that'll be interesting to see. But so what do we have for the show today? We did this idea last year. We ran this same sort of show last year, and as we're getting closer here in July, like I mentioned, it'll start to feel real here with media days coming up. Fall camp will be here before you know it. We've still got some time to sort of project Auburn's season, looking from a 30,000-foot view. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through every game on the schedule, and we are going to give it confidence points. And if you're not familiar with sort of that method, if you've ever played I don't even know if ESPN does the bowl thing anymore. I'm sure they do, but it's the bowl pick'em. I remember doing that growing up. You pick the bowl game that you have the most amount of confidence points in. You say you give that one 40 points. And obviously the game you have the least amount of confidence in, you give it 1 point. And so that's how the scale works. Each of us have our lists prepared, from 12 being, we're going to give Auburn this many confidence points. We are sure they are going to win this game, all the way down to 1 being, hey, we don't want to be, left out in the snow a little bit. We're not going to put all our chips on the table. We're only going to, wager 1 point for that game. And so, I figure we go in. I can't remember how we did it last year. If we went in game by game, I think maybe going point by point would be.
I think we did point by point.
Okay, I think that's what we did last year. So we'll go ahead and start from 12 to 1, you guys, and I'm sure we all have the same answer. We won't touch on these non-power teams too much, although they are kind of interesting for Auburn on this year's schedule. But for number 12, I have Alabama A&M, their FCS opponent. You guys are nodding along in agreement. We won't spend a ton of time on that one. Of course, when it comes to talent level, when it comes to obviously just basic level of competition, you're going to expect that is going to be Auburn's easiest game of the season. Of course, things like Jacksonville State, like that happens, but I don't foresee Alabama A&M being that type of team for Auburn this season. So we'll just kind of brush through that one and go on to number 11. I have Louisiana Monroe with 11 confidence points. I don't know if you guys, either you deviate from that one. It'll be interesting. Bryant Vincent at the helm there, former UAB interim coach. Obviously, Mr. Bowden is no longer at Louisiana Monroe. I think they're just kind of a skeleton this year from everything I've sort of seen. Not projected to be super good on either side of the ball. Obviously, there's going to be a big talent deficiency there. Of course, that game comes toward the end of the season, right before Auburn plays Texas A&M at home. And then, so I would imagine, so we can just keep going through these, I would imagine you guys also have New Mexico at number 10.
Yes.
Unless the name scares you off there. Because I know when I did my early preview a couple weeks ago of New Mexico, people were like, wait a minute, are they back on the schedule? No, it's not New Mexico State. It is New Mexico this year. Very different team. And not to take anything away, take nothing away from New Mexico State last year, but like this is not going to be the same type of game, I wouldn't think. New Mexico State, even from zoomed out in the offseason, now a 21-point upset, nobody could have seen that coming. But there were things you could look at. I think from even the first couple games of the season, you could see that they had a dynamic quarterback and a dynamic offense. That could be the case at New Mexico, but they are also one of the more lower rated teams. I believe New Mexico and ULM are two of the 6 worst teams in the country in terms of offseason SP plus right now. So not expected to be great. Bronco Mendenhall, Jason, is taken over at New Mexico. That's something I did not know.
Defensive guy. I mean, defensive background from the BYU days, and obviously at Virginia. And Bryant Vincent's a guy that a lot of connections in the state of Alabama at ULM. So it'd be interesting. He's an offensive guy, and former. He was an offensive coordinator at Spanish Fort when Mark Freeman was the head coach there. So this guy kind of understands Alabama. So a couple of dynamics for those games, but yeah, those are 2 games that you have to put at the top of the list or the bottom of the list, having a look at it.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I don't know if I could name a single player on any of these 3 teams, but that's also not my job. That's Nathan's job and Jason's job. What I can tell you about those 3 teams is that New Mexico plays Montana State in week 0, and the Bobcats are searching for a big upset, and I think it's possible. So there you go.
It should be. Coaching. Fun fact, Bryant Vincent was the OC at New Mexico last year. But yeah, there's just not a lot going on. I mentioned Bronco Mendenhall because he's done. I think that was a really good find for them this offseason. I believe he was out of coaching for 2 years. Really good coach, has a great history. He does exist, by the way, Christian. That is a real name. That is a real person's name, as we had to inform you recently. So I wouldn't be surprised if he has them in a decent spot moving forward. They did a lot of work in the transfer portal. That game is obviously in week 3, right before Auburn opens SC play against Arkansas. But so we have the same first 3 here. 12 confidence points for Alabama A&M, 11 confidence points for the ULM game, 10 confidence points for New Mexico. Now, moving on to 9. I wonder if we all have the same here. I'll start off. I have Vanderbilt with 9 confidence points. I don't know if anybody...
I have Vandy as well. I have Vandy as a game ahead of Cal in this situation.
I have Arkansas.
Okay.
Not seeing a whole lot of hope for the Hogs this year, just to be honest. I mean, look, Taylon Green, he had a really good spring game, and there was a lot of hype around him in the spring, but he was also going against Arkansas's defense, and he's coming from Boise State. I'd probably rather have KJ Jefferson at quarterback. We'll see what happens during the season. But after the way Arkansas got trounced last year at home, and that coaching staff is on its last leg right now. Their schedule is not easy. I just don't foresee that game going well for the Hogs personally.
Yeah, I went back and forth with Vandy here because part of me, I was talking to somebody this offseason about all the New Mexico State connections. Obviously, Jerry Kill is on staff as an analyst there now. Diego Pavia potentially will be their quarterback. I believe they got a couple more transfers. And this person was like, oh, well, that they're not going to lose to Vanderbilt. Come on. I said, okay, Sure. I mean, we were all saying the same thing about New Mexico State last year. That being said, there's a reason I have the most confidence points out of Auburn's Power 5 games, Power 4, excuse me, against Vandy. It's a roster that I think is not in a good spot everywhere you look. Like I was doing the Georgia preview today, like London Humphreys going to Georgia.
I mean, they lost they lost two really good wide receivers, and they didn't have a whole lot of guys to lose. They lost a couple of defensive backs that were key guys, a couple of
all their quarterbacks, I think.
I mean, they have a couple of additions, but they have a whole lot more subtractions for a roster that could not afford those things. And so, to me, that was one that kind of jumped out, even over Cal.
And I think are Auburn fans going to be scared watching Diego Pavia suit up again? I would be, absolutely. But I think almost that pushed me the opposite direction here. I think they're going to hear about that a lot. And that's going to be a game that I think is motivating for them. Even though Vanderbilt had nothing to do with it last season, it was all Pavia and New Mexico State. But I think Auburn's defense will be eager to get over what was an embarrassing loss, obviously, last season. So with 9 confidence points, me and Jason have Vandy. Christian is not. Christian, you have anything good to say about Arkansas, by the way?
Who's the defensive lineman? Landon Jackson, isn't he still there?
Yeah, he's good.
Okay, yeah, I mean they've got him. Not a whole lot else.
Yeah, they don't have Matt Landers anymore. Christian, do not have Matt Landers. Yeah, we'll see what goes on for Sam Pittman. So moving on now, 8 confidence points. I have the California Golden Bears, and I know Jason does as well.
I have Vandy here.
You have Vandy here. Okay, so I'll be interested. I'm going to composite this all, by the way. If you guys listen to the show or don't listen to the full show, I'll have it on the site, kind of our lists out there. But yeah, I've got Cal here ahead of Arkansas in terms of my confidence in Auburn to win that game. I think Cal is going to be a similar sort of team as last season. They did bring in Chandler Rogers, really, really prolific G5 quarterback from North Texas. They have Jaden Ott once again at running back. Auburn did a really good job against him last year. To me, Jason, this Cal matchup, though, I mean that was a tough game for them last year to go out there and get the win. Thousands of miles from home. It's early, but I see this maybe week 2. I see this as being Cal making that same trip. I think will be more advantageous for Auburn this time around. I think they'll have a chance to maybe win this game by a little bit more this season.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that was a game that we saw for the first time the inconsistencies on Auburn's offense and how it wound up being really the key, because it almost felt like in that game they're like, oh, we're just going to try to run the football and win the game, and they turned it over. They made mistakes. They got behind the chains, and they never could kind of get into a rhythm. Still find a way to win. So I mean, some of that is due to that defense. They got after Auburn. Pretty good defensive plan. And I would imagine they'll attack the line of scrimmage too. But I think this is going to be a very different Auburn offense, and I just don't know that Cal's going to be able to score enough points to come back. And you got the guy that probably had the best game against you now playing for you, and Sam Jackson, now one of your wide receivers. And so I think there's a lot of advantages now for Auburn heading into this rematch.
Yeah, Cal's after we saw them, Jason, Cal's season took an interesting turn. I believe they lost. They were sitting at like 2-4 at one point, ended up coming back and making a bowl game. Their quarterback is Fernando Mendoza. He was the guy down the stretch last year. Wasn't Finley, who transferred again. Obviously was not Sam Jackson. And like I said, they do bring in Rogers. This is the second straight year I remember doing this preview last year of Cal that I thought Justin Wilcox actually did a decent job in the portal. Like I kind of like how they patchworked things. I just don't. I think Auburn at home week 2. This will be a fun game. People will be excited for this game. Auburn didn't lose to Cal last year, but I think people will be excited to welcome them to Jordan-Hare this time around and making that long trip, and excited to maybe say, hey, we've improved. Let's not have such a nail biter that's got to come down to a fourth quarter touchdown. So 8 confidence points, Cal for me and Jason. Christian, I don't know if you want to add anything else about Vandy. We already kind of touched on them.
Yeah, no, you guys already touched on them. I just honestly flip-flop Vandy and Arkansas, at least in my list, because of what you mentioned with Diego Pavia and all those different connections, and I just not very high on Arkansas. So as you're changing all of the colors on the screen in a rainbow.
I'm trying to get it to the orange. There we go. I'm trying to get it to the orange in the background. So moving on now. Moving on to 7. I feel like these are going to be all kind of. I'm interested to see the bottom half if we've got anything different. These are all kind of around the same. 7. I have Arkansas here at 7.
Correct. That's I'm right there. Yeah, I agree. It feels like there's a, how you want to flip Vandy, Arkansas, and Cal. I think those 3 games feel very similar. It feels like there's a pod. You have 3-3, and then maybe even 4 and 2. I don't know how you want to look at it, but these games all fit together, and I think it's an Arkansas game after the way you beat them up there. Obviously, Bobby Petrino adds a little bit of intrigue to this one offensively, but I mean, this is an Auburn team that feels like it should be better, and I don't know that Arkansas feels like it's going to be better than they were last year, to be quite honest.
Yeah, 7, like looking at it now, I mean, it almost feels low. Like I have a lot of confidence in Auburn to win this game. Also where it's positioned on the schedule, I think SEC opener is going to carry a lot of weight. Now Auburn can't look ahead to Oklahoma. That's something they can't do the next week at Jordan-Hare, because everyone's obviously going to talk about that game a lot. But yeah, I mean, for all the reasons you mentioned as well, Jason, I just had them lower. Vandy, I knew was going to be my lowest Power 5. And then I've got just a tiny bit less. I'm a little bit more confident in them beating Cal, just because Arkansas is probably going to have more dudes, even though it's a roster that is not in the right spot, as Christian sort of laid out. You mentioned a guy like Landon Jackson. They've got a few good pieces back in the secondary. Andrew Armstrong came on as a really good receiver there last season. Rocket Sanders transferred to South Carolina, but I had forgotten he barely played last year. Was kind of riddled with an injury, and so their running back returning production is actually decent, but no KJ Jefferson. I'll be interested to see what Taylor Green is able to do coming over from Boise State. But Christian, so I guess you have here.
I have Cal, although I did consider flip-flopping them with another team that I have coming up next, to be honest. Because I just think that Cal game is really interesting. I don't know, something about it, like something about that game last year and just the way, look, it was Auburn's inconsistencies, and there were so many factors playing at midnight and going across the country and everything. But I don't know, something about that game just has kind of a weird feeling to me. So I do have Cal here, but I did consider them flipping them with what's next, 6, I think. Yeah, I did consider that.
Yeah, 6 is after this. And kind of like Jason mentioned, so now we've gone through 6 teams, 6 games. We've all mentioned the same teams in different orders. Auburn's got to win these 6 games. Like, plain and simple. Because I think the drop-off here, and maybe I think you might disagree a little bit, Christian, but for me, the drop-off after this is very, very significant.
Oh, no, I would agree completely. In terms of talent and rosters and everything, I just have a weird feeling about Cal.
Gotcha. Yeah, I just think you look at these games, obviously week 2 against Cal, like that's not going to derail the season because that's very dramatic, but got to get that one early on. You don't want to lose to Arkansas before you go Georgia, Missouri, Kentucky, or Oklahoma, Georgia, Missouri. You don't want to drop to Arkansas. And then Vandy speaks for itself. Don't lose to Vanderbilt. So like these games feel like gotta have it. Absolutely gotta have it. These 6 on the schedule. And so yeah, so 7 confidence points there, me and Jason with Arkansas, and then Christian with Cal. So now we move on to the top half with 6 confidence points. I have Auburn's matchup right before the Iron Bowl, interesting spot, against Texas A&M. You both are sort of nodding along. Is that what you guys have as well?
Yes.
I do. That's exactly what I have. It feels like that's the most winnable of that next group of games. I mean, I think there's some that are very winnable, but that one feels like the one because, I mean, first of all, you're playing at home. Jordan-Hare Stadium is a tough place to play, and that, to me, that sways things pretty quickly when I think about that game.
I would agree with that completely. And the other thing is, look, I think Mike Elko is a fantastic hire for them. I think that staff is moving in the right direction. However, they have a lot of new pieces. Now they do have Connor Wegman back, and they have some of those returning guys, but their roster got gutted a little bit with some of those star power guys that Jimbo Fisher signed with that number 1 ranked class. So it's a little bit of an interesting roster. I think it could work out really well for them, kind of like LSU a couple of years ago when they made a run when Brian Kelly pieced things together, or it could take a little bit of time. But we'll kind of see.
Yeah, looking at it here, I mean, you see like Texas A&M and some people saying they maybe could be ranked like in the preseason. There's some interesting takes on this team. I agree with you, Christian. I think Elko has done a phenomenal job, given the circumstances. Connor Wegman is a guy I think people felt like was going to take that step, and then the injury happened. We saw it when Auburn went out there in Week 4 last season. The only teams, guys, I mean, sitting here on the SP Plus, which this was published in May, so take this for what you will. But Missouri, Alabama, and Georgia are the only teams ahead of Texas A&M. Bill Connolly's SP Plus has A&M a little bit rated above Oklahoma just as an overall product. So that's neither here nor there. But I think the positioning, I give a little bit more points. The positioning on the schedule, like Jason mentioned, I think people are going to have a little bit of nostalgia too for that late season A&M game under Cadillac Williams, wanting to recreate that environment, and don't lose for the Iron Bowl. Carry some momentum trying to go into Tuscaloosa and steal a win. And so, yeah, I agree with you, Jason. This feels like the game, because a lot of it because it's at home. You should beat a year one. Doesn't really matter who they are. A lot of the time, you should beat a year one coaching staff in your building. And so I feel like this game does kind of stand out from this second half that we're looking at here. So 6 confidence points across the board for all of us for Auburn versus Texas A&M, which is going to be November 23rd. Now moving on to number 5. So I'm interested to see kind of what we sort with here. I personally have Auburn's road trip to Kentucky at this spot. What say you guys? Jason?
I have Oklahoma. I just Auburn playing at home, Jordan-Hare Stadium, Oklahoma coming for the first time. That's going to be a wild environment. We have seen what Auburn is capable of when you have that type of atmosphere at Jordan-Hare Stadium. To me, going on the road, any of those other 4 games feels like a more difficult scenario than having Oklahoma at home. So I think Oklahoma's a better football team, but I think that what flips it for me is that game being at Jordan-Hare Stadium, when it is first time, all those things. So I have Oklahoma in this spot.
Yeah, to continue my trend of not adding much to this podcast, I agree with everything that Jason just said, and that's also why I have Oklahoma here. At home, I mean, you have 2. Cal is kind of a marquee game. Fans will get excited for Arkansas for the home opener. They'll get excited for Vandy because it's an SEC game. But your 2 marquee games this year at home are Oklahoma and Texas A&M, to be honest. Those are going to be the ones, no matter what happened the week before, the fans are going to come out, and it's going to be crazy. And for Oklahoma's first SEC road test, for a guy like Jackson Arnold, who did look good when he took over in the bowl game last year, but for him to have to go into Jordan-Hare will be a crazy atmosphere for him and for that team. I think Oklahoma is a significantly better roster than Kentucky, in my opinion, but because of everything that Jason said, I have a little bit more confidence in Auburn's chances against the Sooners than against the Wildcats.
Yeah, I would imagine, Christian, the staff is trying to set up a lot of their big visitors to come for that Oklahoma game.
I think there's already some official visitors set for that game, and I mean, it's July, so yeah.
Yeah, because you're right. Those 2 games stand out on the home schedule, and in my opinion, Oklahoma stands out a pretty good amount above Texas A&M even. So that is like your home game. Yeah, so I flip-flopped heavily on this one as well. I guess this is maybe a little bit of recency bias for me as well, like kind of doing research a little bit of late on Oklahoma, but I guess this sort of reflects that I think higher of Oklahoma as a team that I'm willing to say Auburn could go on the road against Kentucky. And I guess maybe we can just roll, unless we've got something significantly different here, we could roll into number 4, assuming you both have Kentucky in that spot, and I have Oklahoma. Yeah, I mean, the Jackson Arnold situation, like you mentioned, Christian, first road start, and they'll have some gas in the tank from the week prior against Tennessee at home, so they will be churning at that point. So I think
if they win,
what they have on offense if they win. But that is sort of an opportunity for them against a good opponent at home. I think both teams could be 4-0 in this game heading into this one. So I definitely agree with you guys there in terms of a big home atmosphere. But I don't know if you guys knew this. Oklahoma is replacing their entire starting offensive line That to me is, we talked about Mr. Celtic Falk earlier. That to me is a really big key. Their defense, it's always the question of, okay, what happens when a not great side of the ball returns a lot of production? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Oklahoma's defense was so, but they get like everybody back this season. A ton of good players on all three levels, and they added one of the best transfers in demonic. It's probably not demonic. That's kind of how it's spelled. The TCU transfer at defensive.
I think it's
tackle.
just pronounced Dominic Williams. I think
Dominic.
I think
Sure.
that even though it doesn't look like that, I think now I probably just completely got that wrong. But we cover Auburn, not Oklahoma.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean that I think Oklahoma is a pretty significantly better team. But kind of moving on to the Kentucky conversation there, Jason, when you were talking about it, I definitely agree with you. There is a chance you see it against teams that aren't great. Now, I think Kentucky could be pretty good, but the chances I think are higher. I sort of agree with you that they could just go on the road and just not have a lot of answers. I also don't love where Kentucky falls in the schedule. Could be a tricky game. Jason.
Yeah, that's I think the third of 3 road games. You do have a bye week in the middle of those, but you got a month where you're going to be away from home, and that's the last one. So I guess 4-week stretch anyway. And so, you look at this one and go, former Georgia quarterback that grew up an Auburn fan will get a chance to play Auburn, and a guy that everybody kind of thought maybe for 2 years might wind up being Auburn's quarterback one day. Really talented, really athletic, but this Kentucky roster that's much better. They continue to add some pieces, and I think defensively they'll be physical. This will be a physical, brutal football game when you play the Kentucky now. That's the way they play football and do those things. But Auburn has had success in Lexington. They played pretty well up there, even though 2010 that Auburn team went up there and had to battle to the last second to win Cam Newton. So I mean, it is not an easy place to play. But I think of the 4 road games, that's the one that you look at going, hey, if you're starting to pick games, that's the one that probably that stands out as out of that group, probably the one that you would put in this spot, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It also kind of, I mean, look, there's no easy schedules, but it lies in an interesting spot for Kentucky too. They go on the road, Florida, at home against Auburn, on the road, Tennessee. I don't know, something about that's kind of an interesting stretch there. Playing at Neyland and playing down at the Swamp, even though Florida is a corpse.
It's really one of those things too where you just don't know now because of the way these schedules are. Everybody's going to face these tough stretches, and you got these different type of games, different feel because of the playoffs, and it all of a sudden, maybe with one loss, there's not nearly as much pressure as there used to be. Where you go, you lose a second game, you're still okay. So a lot of it there's so much unknown, and I mean, I think it's think about 10 years ago we'd be talking about it, we'd be able to name 15, 20 players on teams. Heck, you can't do that now. It's hard enough to remember who's on Auburn's roster, much less the teams they're going to play this year.
Well, Jason, I mean, you mentioned the unknown. To me, this Kentucky roster is a little bit unknown. I think Brock Vandegrift is really talented, but does he work out there? I think they're on a new offensive coordinator because I believe the guy that they had.
Yeah, Liam Cohen went back to the NFL again.
That's what I thought. So, I mean, there's so many moving pieces. And even the thing I always think about when I'm considering all these different games too is, Hugh Freeze talked about it a lot last year, how hard it is sometimes to get your team ready and rolling to play on a Saturday, just with the way college football is right now. Is Kentucky fired up for that game? Where it lies in the stretch, I don't know. Is Auburn fired up for that game? Could Auburn go in on a losing streak and be down? Jason, you hit the nail on the head. There's so many factors that you could talk yourself in circles on here.
Yeah, Bush Hamdan, the new offensive coordinator from Boise State, comes to Kentucky, and so I know that's been frustrating for them. Like I think you feel like Mark Stoops has been really good, and you feel like their defense has been really good. But even like with Will Levis, I mean, they had some highs. I think it was 2021. Did they win like 10 games? By all accounts, has done a wonderful job with that program, but the offense has really held them back in a lot of ways to Auburn, and a lot of ways similar to Auburn. And now they're in that cycle of changing offensive coordinators over and over again. They do have really good receivers at the disposal for Vandegrift. And
what's interesting is you hear Stoops and you hear, and Kentucky's not an easy place to win football games, but they've lost 6 games 3 out of the last 4 years. And so you think about it, you go, man, they've been so good. Well, they've been good a couple times, but they've been just okay the rest of the time. And so that's the interesting part of it is, I mean, he's kind of put Kentucky football up there, but you go look and you go, more often than not, I think they were 10-3 in 2018. They were 10-3 in 2021. And other than that, every year they have lost. Well, they lost 5 games in 2019, and every other season they lost at least 6 games. And so it hasn't been this juggernaut of 9 or 10 win seasons. That's what it feels like when people talk about Mark Stoops. That is not reality. And so we'll see if this is closer to a 10-win Kentucky team. I don't think it is.
Yeah, the Stoops situation is interesting because like we had that game show with Aaron Gershon from our Kentucky site. And I sort of asked him about the Mark Stoops Texas A&M situation, and he sort of indicated that those recent seasons you talked about, Jason, like people weren't going to be. I mean, obviously they felt like they didn't want to lose him, but it wasn't as dire like, oh, we have to keep this guy as it maybe would have been 3 years ago. There's an interest. I wonder if maybe how much longer he has there, or will he maybe take another job? It's just interesting. He made those comments about the pony up comments about their NIL program, saying, well, you guys got to help us buy players, and I think people sort of got rubbed the wrong way by that. So should be an interesting year for them as well. But so we are all not all in agreement, but you guys have Kentucky here with 4 confidence points. I've got 4 on the Oklahoma game. So I get a decent feeling our top 3 is going to be the same.
Yes,
but
I think so.
Maybe not. Missouri at number 3. It's what? Okay, so
correct.
It is all going to be the same.
And Missouri there. I think these are all going to map out maybe for different reasons, but obviously it's become a much more difficult place to play. Eli Drinkwitz is a guy that's very familiar with Auburn, a lot of Auburn connections on that staff, and not a ton of carryover in terms of recruiting. So you don't know as much. Missouri will probably know a whole lot more about Auburn's roster than Auburn will about Missouri's roster, because there's you don't go to the Midwest a lot and the St. Louis area, those kind of things. Missouri has back one of the best receivers in the country. I mean, this should be a good football team. We'll see if they can handle all of a sudden now being a team that people shoot for instead of kind of being a team under the radar. Can they do those things? But it's going to be a good team, and that'll be a challenging game for Auburn at a place where I predict will be a whole lot different than it was the last time Auburn went there, which was the biggest tomb of a stadium I've ever been in, without question. You could not have had a deader environment in any sporting event that I can ever remember.
Yeah, it was not great. Yeah, I was in the band and I went there in 2017. Was it 21-0 by like the first quarter? Something like that.
I just remember it was the quietest, emptiest stadium I don't know. The only thing that challenges that would have been like Knoxville in 2004, when Junior Rosegreen intercepted all those passes and Auburn just kind of ran them out of the stadium. That was a very quiet environment too. But there were a lot more Tennessee Auburn fans in Knoxville than there were in Missouri, so that made a little bit more noise.
Yeah, and look, when Missouri is great, like you mentioned, Jason, it should be a tough place to play. Like when Missouri is good, that place seems like it's awesome. And so that should be a good environment. A nickel, if you guys know who and where Missouri plays off the top of your head the week before Auburn. They play UMass on the road. They play at UMass. I have no idea why that game is scheduled.
I remember it. I remembered a crazy game. I just didn't remember that was it. Yeah, it's not ideal to break up a conference game by going to UMass in October. Yeah, not ideal. I mean, it's not a game they're going to lose, but that's it from a travel standpoint. That's a little bit of a challenge. And I mean, we dealt with it. It's not like going to Cal, but you could have a little lag from going all the way up to Boston and playing a game like that, trying to come back.
Yeah, I'm certainly not going to put them above the other 2 teams that we have on here, but I also don't love where this game is for Auburn on Missouri's schedule. Just like Auburn, they are out of town for a lot of October. Their October is at Texas A&M, at UMass, Auburn at home, at Alabama the week after. And so at A&M and at Alabama, you don't love that. And so I think there's going to be a little bit more importance on this game for them saying, hey, when we come back home against Auburn, let's not screw this up because you got to go right back on the road to Alabama the week after. Then they have a bye week and they host Oklahoma after that. And so I think Kentucky feels the same way. I saw some Kentucky writers talking about this game a couple weeks ago, the Auburn game for them, saying that's a swing game for their season. Like if they can win that game, feeling like they'll be in a better place in terms of an overall record. And so, but yeah, so Missouri 11 wins last year, did a really great job. Drinkwitz sort of rose up. And look, I mean, I think last offseason people talked about the potential of him maybe being on the hot seat if things didn't go their way. Brady Cook turned out to be awesome. Luther Burden, that helps a lot. They do have to replace running back, and that's going to be a question mark. They bring back a ton of guys on defense. It's going to be a very experienced team, and this could be the best receiver on Auburn's schedule this year they have to face.
Probably is. Honestly, looking at this schedule, I mean, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but Missouri should easily be a college football playoff team, in my opinion.
Let's see.
I mean,
here.
Murray
first
State,
4 games are absolutely guaranteed.
Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vandy, boom, 4-0. At A&M, you should win that game. At UMass, you should win that game. Auburn, Missouri will be the favorite. Alabama, I think Missouri could challenge Alabama in Bryant-Denny. I'm not going to say they're going to win, but they could challenge them. Oklahoma at home, probably favor the home team slightly. At South Carolina, at that point, what does South Carolina even look like? At Mississippi State, year 1 of Jeff Lebby, they'll be better, but not that improved. And then Arkansas.
Wow. Yeah, that is.
I mean, you feel like there's probably 3 swing games for them. And again, does 9-3 in the Southeastern Conference get you in the college football playoffs? It may, depending on what your losses are. I mean, if you know, and depending if you have a couple, if you have a couple of big wins and they're close, yes, something like that. But yeah, I mean, that's as favorable as you can get in terms of schedule in the Southeastern Conference, probably.
If a 10-2 Missouri team has lost to Alabama and Texas A&M on the road, like they are absolutely in, no question. Well, I don't know about no question. We'll see how this whole thing works out. But yeah, I didn't know that, Christian. I mean, I don't know what the easiest SEC easiest relative. I don't know what the easiest SEC schedule is, but that's like the opposite of Florida's schedule right there.
Poor Billy.
Poor Billy. First, he had his 6'10" offensive tackle taken from him today by Georgia, and now he's going to go 3-9.
And poor Keith, for that matter, our old buddy.
Way to go, Keith. All right, so let's get into the 2 heavy hitters here. I would imagine we go Alabama, Georgia, right? In that order, 2 and 1.
Correct. Yeah, you have to put Alabama in front of Georgia. I mean, Alabama, new coaching staff, lots of changes, roster turnover. I think by the time you get to this game, it's an Auburn team that'll have some chance to grow up, and Alabama will too in year 1 of a system. But yeah, I don't know. It feels like when you start comparing rosters, Alabama's roster is still going to be good, but Georgia's roster is still going to be probably the best roster in the country. Then Ohio State will be right there too. So, it bumps Alabama up a little bit for me in front of Georgia in this situation.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would just say you have a little bit more of a chance in the Iron Bowl than you do, at least in recent history, on the road compared to going to Georgia. I mean, even the Cadillac Williams game a couple of years ago, I mean, Auburn lost by 21 maybe, but it was a little bit closer than that. And if Keontae Scott doesn't get called for a ghost fumble of a punt, you could be in it a little bit more than that. You're still going to lose the game, but you'd be in it a little more than that. So Auburn has shown that it can be at least a little bit more competitive in Bryant-Denny than it can over in Athens. I don't think Auburn will win either game, but that would be my justification for putting Alabama at 2 and Georgia at 1.
Yeah, just the competitiveness, I think, is the big question mark with these 2 games. Can Auburn go in there? What does Alabama look like? If they're a playoff contender, we have no precedent to believe Auburn can win this game. They haven't won there since 2010. Like, if Alabama's good, Auburn can win, but it's been so, these 2 games have just been so uncompetitive. Like Christian said, Alabama's been a little bit better than Georgia when they go on the road there. But I agree with Jason. Like, for everything they've done, they've been through this offseason, they're still going to be one of the most talented rosters in the country. Jalen Milroe is still going to be one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in the country. We'll see how he fits in that offense. I would imagine pretty well, with a lot of good players around him. Still have NFL players on defense. Their schedule is interesting. They play at Oklahoma the week before. That's not great. Now, if you go out there and grab a big win, that'd be nice for you.
Correct. It is. That's the interesting thing about Alabama this year is that the schedule. I mean, even Western Kentucky, USF to open the season those aren't two cupcake games when you start talking about kind of changing things. And then you're at Wisconsin in week 3, 11 a.m. Central Time game, one of those, and then you get Georgia at home. Obviously, Vandy's doesn't matter, but you're playing at Tennessee, Missouri at home, at LSU, at Oklahoma, and Auburn at home. I mean, that's a much more difficult schedule. And here's the thing: you say you lose to Georgia and lose to Tennessee, and you're a 2-loss team. All of a sudden, that's a ton of pressure. Now, as you come down the stretch, and you got Oklahoma there, you get to 3 losses, and all of a sudden, I mean, now it's not going to get to that level, but I have lived in this state, and I know when there were bricks thrown through coaches' windows, and they weren't that bad. You start losing a few games, and all of a sudden, that's a heap load of pressure on a bunch of people, and so that could impact this game dramatically as you get later in the season.
I will say I'm also looking at it. I should have done more research going into this podcast. That's on me. But Georgia plays at Alabama the week before they play Auburn. And I mean, I think Georgia will win that game. But what happens if Auburn beats Oklahoma? I mean, we're talking hypotheticals here. But what happens if Auburn beats Oklahoma, is 5-0? I mean, Georgia would probably be undefeated at that point too. But what if they exhaust almost all their energy just to beat Alabama in overtime or something like that? Now, I'm not saying Auburn's going to roll through Oklahoma or something. Again, all hypotheticals. I still think Auburn will lose both of these games, but there's a lot of different interesting scenarios here where the one thing Auburn has going for it is the fact that Georgia has to go play at Alabama, and Alabama has to go play at Oklahoma the week before both of those games for Auburn.
Yeah, and then like you mentioned, Christian, like you have, there's the question of riding momentum, like I said, but you've also had the other side of it, like you said, like exhausting yourself, a body blow game the week before. Now,
I mean, Auburn could do that too. It's all just
Auburn's got the same thing.
Throwing stuff out there. It's July 8th. We just need the season to start.
It is objectively July 8th. Yeah, I mean, it's Alabama could. I mean, it's crazy to look at a schedule and for Alabama, we're just not used to saying they could have 3 losses by November. Like we're just not used to that. I'm not of the camp that thinks that Alabama's going to go 8-4 this year. I'm leaning more like 10-2 because I just think think it'll take some time. If they are going to go that direction of being in relation to their standards, it's going to take a couple years. I don't think it's going to wear off that quickly. Having so many dang good players all over the place. And DeBoer is a great coach. And they've done a great job in recruiting as well. And so I know a lot of Auburn fans are really interested to, we're kind of hoping on that downfall right away. We'll see if it happens this year. We'll see what they look like on the field. Georgia, we have at number 1, not number 1. We have with 1 confidence point, aka our fewest number of confidence points. This could be preseason number 1 team in the country. I like a lot of things about this team, as everyone else does, because they're really good. Carson Beck could be the best quarterback in the SEC, maybe. Tons of dudes on defense as usual. I mentioned London Humphreys, who went from Vanderbilt to Georgia. Georgia also got 2 other power receivers, a Stanford tight end who caught like 5 touchdowns. Kirby went in the portal this year, which he normally doesn't have to do. They got a lot of good players on both sides of the ball, as usual. Jason, I think the competitiveness, again, in this game in particular, you lost by 32 the last time you were out there. Since that 2005 win, Auburn has had losses of 27, 38, 27, 17, 21, and 32 points. That's not all of them, but Auburn fans have just been kind of accustomed to going in there and this game just not really working out. And so in year 2, obviously an upset win, we won't even that would be incredible. And I'm not saying you should settle for just being competitive. However, if this offense goes in there in week 6, humming along a little better, and you keep this thing closer for 4 quarters. They did it last year at home. It's been so different at home. If you do that in year 2 for Freeze, that'll be a good sign, especially still relatively early in the season.
Yeah. Give yourself a chance to win the game. That's kind of what you want to do in Athens right now. But you mentioned that's the key for me. Carson Beck returns. That makes them the number 1 spot. And you mentioned, obviously adding in, talented transfers. You add in Trevor Etienne at running back, who was one of Florida's best players. You also have Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas coming back in addition to the guys you added from the portal. And so, this is a stacked wide receiver group with a quarterback that can sling it. I think this thing at Georgia team is going to be pretty good. And defensively, obviously, they're going to have a ton of guys back. And they've got talented players. They lost some secondary guys, so that's probably the one thing. They're going to have to replace some of them. They'll have a few weeks to do that. But I would predict that's going to be a team that's probably going to create a little more pressure than they have in the past few years. To me, Georgia was an easy one. I didn't really even think about putting Alabama in this spot. I thought Georgia was pretty head and shoulders in terms of difficulty for Auburn.
Well, it's even like you lost Brock Bowers and you replace him with Oscar Delp, the transfer from Stanford, and a couple other really good tight ends. So you lost a first round, like top 15 pick or whatever it was, who could have gone top 10 talent wise, and you replace him with other fantastic players. That's just Georgia right now.
Yeah. Oscar Delp, higher rated recruit, by the way, than Brock Bowers, which is really stupid. But obviously Brock Bowers, it's going to be tough to replace his individual, effort, because that guy almost single-handedly, him and Carson Beck are the reason that Georgia pulled that thing out in Jordan-Hare Stadium last season. And Jason mentioned the defense as well. Yeah, secondary, if you want question marks, which there really aren't, but if you want to find them, breaking in a new safety, breaking in a new corner with Lassiter on his way out. And so, but you got Malachi Starks, you got Everett, I believe is the last name of the guy at the other guy at cornerback who had kind of an up and down year. And so
how about Georgia has recruited better than anybody in the country in the last 6 or 7 years for sure. 5 transfer wide receivers. That doesn't tell you how important that position is.
True.
And how everybody's looking for production and looking for experience and looking for immediate help. Then that points to it right there. Georgia has had top 1 or 2 classes for so long in a row, 5 transfer wide receivers. And so that's what you look at going. And even schools like that have to go out and find guys. If a guy didn't develop, a guy didn't, and that's where Georgia is too.
Yeah, they'll be battle tested for sure. Not that they'll need to be, but Clemson to open the season for Georgia in Atlanta. They go to Kentucky in week 3. They will have played Clemson, Kentucky, and Alabama all away from home before they face Auburn. So that's a game they'll be looking to come home and snag. They also go to Texas. They go to Ole Miss. Not a cakewalk for them this season.
It's the most difficult Georgia schedule that I can ever remember. And there's been some tough ones over the past. This is the most difficult schedule because of those road games for Georgia. And that's the reason why you got. I mean, it's hard to run through. We saw Georgia. I mean, almost lost to Missouri on the road, and they almost lost to Auburn on the road. And you start talking about the road games they have. I mean, there could be some challenges along the way.
It's a good thing they have a nice, easy one to open it with Clemson.
I know you liked Bud Elliott's tweet the other day, Christian, about, well, maybe he'll just transfer to Clemson later on.
That was a good one. Bud
it took me a millisecond. It took me a millisecond to be like, wait a minute. It's like, it's a good one. It's got layers. It's got layers to it. So there we go. So there's our annual off-season exercise. A little bit of deviation here and there, but I think for the most part, if you sort this thing into little pods and tiers, we all feel about the same about which games are most and least winnable on the schedule. Like I already talked about, getting those top 6 on our list, like you have to have those games. That gives you a six win baseline, or at least it should. I'm sure we were saying the same thing last year about New Mexico State, so don't do that again. But I don't know. We'll get more into it, but
I like Christian mentioned too. Everything can change too. If you 4-0 and beat Oklahoma at home, even if you go lose to Georgia, that's a much more confident Auburn football team as you head down the stretch. And so that can change the way things happen. And so, again, it's just so much unknown that, I mean, could this Auburn team be 9-3 or 10-2 if everything falls right? I think they could be. But you're going to have production, offense, the explosive offense, score point, all those things that people are hoping happens would have to happen for that to happen. But we've seen stranger things happen as well.
Yeah, I think and Peyton Thorne will talk about it next week at media days. But this passing game has to be better. All signs are pointing to that being the case. Defense obviously has to have consistent playmakers under DJ Durkin, and so it'll be here before we know it. We are now definitely inside a month until fall camp begins. We don't have an exact date on that yet. Should get that from Freeze before media days, but it's usually those first few days of August, and so after that, be full steam ahead. And so this really kind of feels like the last week of a little bit of directionlessness in terms of the college football offseason, because next week we'll get rolling with media days. The week after that, we'll start gearing up, previewing fall camp, talking about what that's going to look like, and then we'll be in it. And so, as we look back at this thing, I think like Oklahoma and Kentucky, that like 5-4 range in terms of confidence points, those might be the games that could turn you from like a 7-5 team to a 9-3 team. And so we will see what that looks like. We're still so far out, but yeah, this was fun as usual. I will mention before we go, our 4th of July sale. I don't even think that's what it's called, but I just like to give them names that make sense when I put them up on the site. But
take advantage of the 4th of July sale. Here as you listen on Tuesday, July 9th.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what is it called? I'm going to go find the email. But anyway, it doesn't matter. 50% off you can get until the 16th over at Auburn Undercover.
SEC Media Days. SEC Media Days special. That's
there you go. We'll pivot to Media Days. That's a good idea. I'm going to go change the front page right now. But I mean, just today, Christian had his mock class. Your second one, right, Christian, of the 25?
Second one, honestly, I would consider like a mock class 2.5 over the next week or so, potentially, as things continue to change every day. But yeah, we'll see. Nathan mentioned 50% off. You can also join $1 for your first month. Take a little test drive. That'll get you through Big Cat Weekend here at the end of the month, which you will definitely want to be a VIP member for that. So look, come give us a try if you're still here listening at the 52-minute mark and you're not subscribed to the website. You might as well come try $1 for a month.
That's a really good point. If you're mowing the lawn or taking going home from work, taking the dog on a walk, whatever, and you like us enough to hang around, you can also consume the content in written form over on the website. And so we've had, it's been a great off season. It's been fun. I've really enjoyed what we've done over on the site. And as Christian mentioned, recruiting is about to get, late July is going to be, it's the place you want to be. It's going to be crazy for Big Cat Weekend. And as Auburn's trying to not put the finishing touches on the class, because signing day is not until December, but this is where you can make the headway. And things are going to start becoming clearer moving forward. And then it'll be fall camp. And, we'll have our normal fall camp stuff. Last year, just kind of as a teaser, if you want to go and try out the promo, we had intel every morning, called it What We're Hearing. We're going to do that again. We're in the building every day, so might as well write down a few nuggets here and there from everybody, including Philip as well. And so enjoyed doing that last year. Anyway, we're approaching an hour, so I'll go ahead and call it there. Appreciate everybody for listening. Go leave us a 5-star review if you guys enjoyed the show. It's the number one thing that helps us out. The bumper music is by Beats by Mordecai. You guys can follow him on Twitter, SoundCloud, and Instagram. Until the next episode, we will catch you guys later. Everybody have a great rest of the week.